Okay, so before I go any further, for anyone who's a first time watcher, I am more than a novice when it comes to learning Japanese, if you couldn't already tell by the title. Today's video is just going to be a quick rundown of my progression in this journey up to this point as a first time language learner. I'll be covering some of the ups and downs, difficulties, and tricks I've learned along the way. This is in no way a video of an expert explaining how the Japanese language works. We hopefully all know that is not going to be the case. However, this video will serve as a glimpse into someone else's discoveries and insights they made along the way for anyone struggling themselves. And if you're already way past this beginner level, I'm sure if you stick around, you'll still get a laugh out of the struggles us beginners usually deal with, such as the moment you realize it's going to take a lot longer than you thought. So with that out of the way, enjoy the video, and if you want to stay up to date on my journey, I recommend subscribing. Now, being an English speaker, the very first hurdle I had with learning Japanese was of course the fact that not a single Japanese character looks even remotely familiar. Unlike something along the lines of Spanish or French where they use the Roman alphabet, the Japanese characters are a completely new sight to my eyes. Then I heard there were 3 writing systems in Japanese: hiragana, katakana, and kanji. It was at this point I thought to myself, what the hell do you need 3 whole writing systems for? All we got is 1 alphabet. Now that I've been studying for a couple months, it's not nearly as scary, and 3 writing systems make plenty of sense. Hiragana is the base, katakana is borrowed words, and kanji makes hiragana easier to read. At least that's my interpretation of it. All in all, it took me around 20-ish hours probably to get most of the hiragana and katakana down. One thing I wish I would have done differently was learn hiragana and katakana at the same time, as I would have saved a lot of time by doing that. Also, even after doing it myself, I don't think you really need to put too much emphasis on stroke order for hiragana and katakana, as you'll start to understand what makes a stroke order correct the more you practice your kanji. With the more and more kanji I've practiced, sometimes I can tell the stroke order of a kanji I've never seen just because it feels right. So for anyone thinking about starting their journey, make sure you start with hiragana and katakana first, because it will enable you to read all the Japanese words as long as the kanji have furigana over the top. And being able to read is super important, as you'll learn a lot more and a lot faster reading Japanese. After hiragana and katakana, it was on to kanji, which I've heard was notoriously hard and can be grueling at times. But in my honest opinion, I kind of enjoy learning kanji. I don't know if that's a hot take or something, but I've been enjoying myself with the N5 kanji. Now, to be fair, I have seen more advanced level kanji and it certainly looks more difficult, so I have yet to experience those later levels of kanji. But so far, it's kind of like a fun little memory game for me. So, probably the biggest hurdle I've had so far with kanji was the realization that a certain kanji can be said in multiple ways. And boy did that hit me like a truck. After finally getting some kanji down, remembering what they mean, look like, and how they sound, just to see it in a word with a completely different sound, oh man. I sort of understand the concept behind it, but not nearly enough to explain it. I just know it has something to do with certain parts of the kanji, and that some relate to the sound, and some relate to the meaning, or something along those lines. Again, I'm still not too sure. Nevertheless, this was certainly a low blow I didn't see coming at first. I've now learned probably anywhere from 100 to 150 kanji so far, and really the only tip I have at this point is just consistent repetitions. Bust out these kanji every day. It doesn't have to be like hours and hours, it could just be like 15 to 30 minutes. But if you slack off too much before they get a chance to stick in your head, you're gonna forget a lot. Another hurdle for me was finding out that kanji wasn't the only important thing I needed to learn. Who would have thought? I know it sounds ridiculous, but I seriously thought I just needed to learn a bunch of kanji and I'd probably be fine. This was before I ever thought of the importance of things like grammar or listening comprehension, and way before my introduction to particles. Now, my advice would be to start grammar sooner rather than later, and I'd put listening right alongside with that. At first, you won't understand a word being said, however you will get used to the sounds of the language and start to pick up on all its little nuances. After some time, your ears will start to pick out certain key words here and there. This is kind of where I'm at. Vocab is also an important one and is kind of similar to kanji in that the best thing to do is consistent repetitions. You're gonna have to play the long game for a lot of these things. One more thing I want to touch on is that I try to immerse myself in Japanese whenever I can. For obvious reasons, I can't really keep track of these hours unless I was documenting every minute of my day, which quite frankly, I'm just not gonna do. I hope you understand. The other reason I don't count these hours is because they aren't really active hours. What I mean by this is I'm either only half paying attention or not paying attention at all. This isn't going to be enough for you to seriously learn a language in a reasonable amount of time, but what it does do is over time, fill in any little cracks missing in your normal studies. Now, when I'm actively paying attention and listening to whatever it may be in Japanese, I of course count it because it is getting my undivided attention. The only other thing I don't count in my hours is anime with English subtitles, because I believe it doesn't do much benefit at all since you're still reading English the old time. But I do think watching anime with Japanese subtitles can be super beneficial, so that I obviously count. Moral of the story, however, immersion is a kind of thing you have going on in the background that never really gets too much attention until one day you look back and see how far you've come. It's certainly a slow burn, but its impact on your journey will be immense. Lastly, we'll take a look at what my 100+ hours have looked like so far. So, I had been messing around with hiragana and katakana a little before I decided to start keeping track of my hours. I also was watching videos on Japanese and trying to get somewhat of an idea of what I was getting into, so my first 20 hours were before I started keeping track. It might have been a couple hours less or more, but 20 sounded about right, and in the end, a couple hours difference isn't the end of the world. So in the remaining 80 hours and 47 minutes, 28 hours and 55 minutes of that time was spent on kanji, 8 hours 46 minutes of that was spent on kana, which is hiragana and katakana, 11 hours and 18 minutes of that was spent on reading, 10 hours and 43 minutes was spent on vocab, 13 hours and 18 minutes was spent on grammar, 7 hours and 10 minutes was spent on active listening comp, and lastly 37 minutes was spent on informative Japanese videos, kind of like tips and tricks, stuff like that. If you've been keeping up to date on my journey, you'll know that my goal for this week is to start rounding out my different categories some more, because as you can see, I'm quite top heavy in kanji. It's not a bad thing, I just need to diverge my focus a little more, and that's all. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and either found it helpful or relatable, and I encourage you all to share some of your own shortcomings or things you learned along the way, as we can always learn from each other's mistakes or successes. Once again, if you want to stay up to date on my journey, I recommend subscribing for weekly videos on learning Japanese, and until next time, goodbye and good luck.